Today I also have to make this old, cracking, chipping black trim on your car look like brand new again with a little time, Bondo, and paint. Decades of UV rays have not been kind to the black trim on this $350 Acura Legend that I've been restoring on the channel. The black rubber coating has deteriorated, exposing the bare metal underneath. And it's so brittle that I can chip it off with my finger. It's ideal to do this off of the vehicle to avoid damaging the surrounding paint. If you look closely, you can see the black is completely separating from the metal. It flakes right off all the way up to the edge. I've got to get all this off before I try and refinish it, or it's going to keep flaking off. Say hello to my little friend, Mr. Metal Scraper. The scraper doesn't need to be sharp at all to remove what's left of the brittle black coating. I'll put links in the description to all the tools I'm using. There were a few areas where the black coating was still intact and bonded to the metal trim, so I didn't bother scraping it off there. It really doesn't take much effort to scrape off. Just get an edge of the metal scraper under the black coating and it lifts right off and breaks on the edge. Now that most of the black coating is scraped off, I still have a little bit on the edges that I didn't get with the scraper, and I'm going to sand that down smooth with some 80 grit sandpaper. Because you can see the edges are still a lot higher than the middle that came off with the scraper. I have the 80 grit wrapped around a foam sanding block for the sanding I'm doing on the flat surface of the trim. My fingers are round and the block is flat, so the block will help achieve a more uniform flat surface compared to if I just held the sandpaper with my hand. I've probably been sanding for 15 or 20 minutes, but look at these edges now. And I have a nice smooth transition into the areas that are still bonded to the metal. Little tiny cracks like this will be filled in with Bondo. Not worried about those. And the rest of the black surface is scuffed up to remove any of the rotted surface that got crispy from UV rays. Taking the edges down means I'll need a lot less Bondo. And the 80 grit scuffed up the metal too, so that will help the Bondo adhere to it better than if it was smooth. Time to clean up this mess. I vacuumed up the dust, but before I apply the Bondo, I need to clean these and remove any oils from my fingers. And I'll use prep spray for that. Or any wax and grease mover of your choice. I like this because it sprays on. And then a quick wipe down with a microfiber towel. Don't use a paper towel here because little pieces of lint like to get stuck to scratchy surfaces. Still had a little bit of dirt on there as well. And wipe the bench down too. And give these a minute to dry. Now it's time to apply some Bondo. Get the correct ratio of Bondo and hardener according to the instructions of the product you're using. And then use the spreader to press it down on the mixing board in different directions. And eventually it will become one color. And I don't need a whole lot. This only needs a skim coat. That's not good. I don't want this to cure in that space where the trim slides onto the door edge. Wipe that out with a towel. It's easier to remove now than later after it hardens. This is USC Chromate Light Body Filler, which is a lightweight Bondo, great for thin applications. There's also Bondo with fiberglass, but that's heavier for thicker applications. Not what I want here. It's already gumming up. I was a little heavy on the hardener ratio. The rest of this batch is going to waste. And I mixed another batch. The hardest part of this is actually keeping the Bondo from going into the inside of the trim where it slides on the edge of the door. Get some in here where the bare metal transitions into the black coating. Alright, this one's good. Notice these gouges in the Bondo I'm laying down. That's from pieces of dirt or debris in the Bondo. Might have been pieces of old hard Bondo that came off the mixing board. Not much I can do about it right now. I'll have to fill those in on the next round. It's starting to get hard to work with. See it laying down all chunky? Yep, that's it for this batch. I scraped the mixing board better this time to avoid any debris in the next batch of Bondo. I kept getting Bondo in this gap in the trim, and I found that if the side with the gap faces down toward me, then I can apply the Bondo the same way on the spreader, toward me. Then I don't keep getting it in that gap on the edge. Notice there's no more debris or little hard pieces in the Bondo this time, laying down nice and smooth. These are kind of challenging because they're so thin. I fixed peeling window trim before, and it's a lot thicker and easier to work with. And even though this area wasn't peeling, it does have some tiny cracks, as well as scratches from sanding. So I'm putting a thin layer over this too. And same for this end. I'm using the plastic spreader to really press the Bondo down into any cracks. And I already had all the supplies and tools that I'm using today left over from other projects. But I'll go ahead and put a list together in the description and make it easy for you to find these products online. Or any auto paint store should have these things as well. Ah, there's a piece of dirt. Try and fill it in. There. And done with this batch. Alright, I let these cure for a couple of hours, and I have a fresh piece of 80 grit. I see some high points that I need to take down first. All these globs. And I have some bare metal showing here in those gouges where there was debris in the filler. So I'll sand this all down smooth first and then fill those in. Some more here, and you can actually see the tiny piece of old dried Bondo from the mixing board that ended up in the new Bondo. It doesn't take very much dirt in Bondo to get these gouges. The high points easily sand down flush to the rest of the surface with just a little bit of hand sanding. After I knocked down the globs in high areas, I went back to using a foam block wrapped in the 80 grit to sand the full length of the trim for a more uniform surface. Alright, now the surface is all nice and flush for the most part. I even have these tiny cracks filled in. A little more sanding to do right here. I went back down to the bare metal, and that's fine. How it feels is more important than how it looks right now. Let's look at this one. Here's the transition from bare metal to the original black finish. Nice and smooth. And if you look really close, all the tiny cracks and UV damage have been filled in. So this is good, even though it doesn't look great. There's a gouge there I still need to fill in. Right here too. And here. But the rest of this one is looking good. I got some on the edge, but I can scrape that off sometimes. Or just sand it off later. I have more gouges on the other one. Some pretty bad pitting too. And some more Bondo on the edge. It's time for another round of Bondo to fill in these imperfections. Okay, the Bondo has cured. All the dark areas are the last skim coat that I applied. Ah, shoot. Here's a low spot I missed. And another one right here where the bare metal meets the black coating. And I missed this gouge. Using the 80 grit wrapped around the foam sanding block, I gave the surface a quick sand to knock down all the high points. Then wiped them down and cleaned them for the next round of Bondo. This is the third and final round of Bondo. At this point, I'm only filling the minor imperfections that I missed on the second round. Notice I'm running my finger along the trim as I go, trying to feel any other imperfections that need filled. Time for more sanding. Now, I don't have a lot to remove at this point, and I don't want to add a lot of deep scratches. This already feels pretty smooth. So I'm done with the 80 grit, and it's time to move up to some 180 grit. And after that, some 320 grit. And just like before, I sanded with the 180 grit paper wrapped around the foam block. You can see by the lack of sanding dust that I'm not removing a lot of material anymore. The point of the 180 is only to remove enough Bondo to sand through the deeper scratches left by the 80 grit paper. And then I repeated with the finer 320 grit paper to remove any scratches left from the 180 grit paper. And done with the 320 grit. Now look at the surface, and I should see barely any scratches. It feels really smooth to the touch now. All the imperfections should be flush at this point, like this chip on the edge. Feels perfectly smooth. I like to run my finger over each piece to see if I missed any pitted areas or gouges. If I find anything I missed, then I'll apply more filler in that spot. But these all feel smooth. Now it's time to move on to primer and fill in these very fine scratches. I've got my paint area set up here on the garage floor. This is the PVC bike rack I built in a really old video. The goal is to have these up off the floor because it's dusty concrete and I don't want any dirt to end up in the primer. And before I apply any primer, I'm going to clean these up one last time again with some prep spray, degreaser. Link for this is in the description. It's good stuff. And it's important to use a blue shop towel here because they won't leave lint on the surface. Don't bother with kitchen paper towels. This is what you want. I wipe these down off camera. You saw me do that earlier. Let's go check out the primers. So we're done with that. Next, I'm going to apply some self-etching primer, and it's ideal for bonding to bare metal. Because if you look closely, I have a lot of areas with bare metal showing. So I'll start with the self-etching first. And next, I'll apply some filler primer. And the filler primer is going to help fill in any of the fine scratches or imperfections still left in the surface. And I'll do at least a few coats of this and then lightly sand it. Then comes the primer sealer, and this will give me a uniform surface after these other two primers and sanding some areas. I recommend a primer sealer when painting over a splotchy surface that is different colors or products. And then finally the trim paint. This is a semi-gloss paint. It looks like black plastic when it dries. It's also really easy to apply. This is a super old can. The label looks a lot different now. I'll put links to all these products in the description. Shake it for a few minutes. Test spray. And just a light coat is all I need here. This will bond to the bare metal, and then the filler primer will bond to this. I'm a little light right here. And that's good for a first coat. When I'm done using aerosol paint to keep the nozzle from clogging, turn it upside down and let the rest of the paint spray out. Next, filler primer. All filler primer is a really heavy, thick primer, and it also sands easily. It's perfect for making a rough surface smooth or filling in tiny scratches. Notice how heavy it covers. So the idea is I want to build up the thickness with multiple coats. And then I can sand any high points down flush if needed. I let this dry for 10 minutes. Look at that. Any imperfections really pop once everything is one color. Everything else looks good. It's a little worse than a minor imperfection, but I'll see how much I can build it up with the filler primer. Then I applied a second coat of filler primer. Second coat's done. Oh, by the way, do this in a well-ventilated area, as I am. It's also about 80 out today, so that helps the paint dry faster. If you're in an enclosed area, then use a respirator mask, like this guy. Time for a third coat. I went a little heavier on this coat to really build up the thickness. And 15 minutes later, another coat. Followed by one last coat for a total of 5. Alright, the filler primer has fully cured. I let these sit overnight because I did so many coats, but they're looking really good now. And now I'll sand these with some higher grip paper. I have some 320 and some 400. I'm all done with those because I've eliminated all the deep scratches with the filler primer. So it's only fine paper from here on out. If you look real close, you can see imperfections in the surface. After I sand, the filler primer will remain in the low areas and the higher areas will be flush. Alright, done with 320 grit. There's still a gouge visible, but I have enough layers of filler primer that I can probably just sand this flush. This is the 320 grit I'm using. I sanded all the way through back down to the Bondo and some bare metal, but that's okay. As long as it feels perfectly smooth, that's what matters. Down here on the end, I got down to the metal too. Now it's time to sand the trim with the 400 grit. 400 is a finer grit, so it removes less material, so I don't really need to worry about using a foam sanding block at this point. I'm just sanding the whole surface to remove the scratches from the 320 grit. Next, I set everything up for painting and wipe the trim down again to remove any sanding dust. First, I'm going to go back to the self-etching primer, just to touch up those spots where I sanded back down to bare metal. Now this has been drying for 10 minutes, and next I'm going to go over it with the primer sealer. And this will give me a uniform gray surface. One cool thing about these Duplicolor cans is most of them have a rotating nozzle, and you can turn it 90 degrees. And that makes the spray pattern wider side to side and less up and down. There's one light coat of primer sealer. Light coats dry faster. Multiple light coats are always better than one heavy coat. Plus, I don't have to worry about runs or sags. And then a second coat of primer sealer. The second coat of primer sealer is dried. Now I have a smooth, uniform finish. And it's finally time for trim paint. But first, take a look at the back side of the trim. It has some primer overspray on it. And I'll be able to see the back of the trim when the doors are open. So first, I'm going to flip these over and paint the backs with trim paint. That was one light coat, and I still see some of the primer. So I'm going to do a second coat. But I had to shut the doors because my neighbor started mowing, and I don't want dust or dirt landing on the paint. So because I don't have any ventilation now, I have to use the mask that I showed earlier. Safety first. That looks a lot better. I'll let it dry and check back. According to the instructions, this dries to the touch in 30 minutes and can be handled in 1 hour. It's been almost a half hour, so I'm gonna flip the trim over and paint the top sides. Always start with a test spray to be sure the can doesn't have a spitting nozzle. I'm laying down even coats. Then I came around to the opposite side to get the very edge that I couldn't spray from the other side. I have the tip of the nozzle turned 90 degrees here, so the spray pattern is horizontal instead of vertical to match the contour of the trim. That helps more of the paint end up on the trim and less overspray on the floor. But with more paint landing on the trim, that also means I need to move a little faster to avoid a heavy coat. And looking back now, the coat was a bit on the heavy side for a first coat. Here's how the first coat looks after it's had a chance to dry. This paint is so forgiving. I was a little heavy for a first coat, and it self-levels and dries with a perfectly even satin black finish. Kudos to Duplicolor for formulating such a great product. Next, I applied a second coat of trim paint. Alright, it's been about 15 minutes and the second coat is good and dry. And again, a nice, consistent satin black finish. I'll let these sit overnight and put them back on the car tomorrow. I really do love this trim paint. And done! This car looks so much younger now. Hit that thumbs up if you think so too. I could repair the clear coat and just leave the chipping trim the way it was. Let's take one last look at the before. And now I'm proud to get this $350 Acura Legend on the road. Consider subscribing for more how-to videos and project vehicle updates here at the 6th Gear Garage. Thanks for watching.